Thank you, Anlas Ken Corley. I very much welcome the opportunity to make statements, but to listen to deputies and colleagues here this afternoon on what is such an important issue, and I suppose looking at how we can come together further to combat domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. This is an area that I, as Minister for Justice, have prioritised since my appointment earlier this year. The Government as a whole is fully committed to combating domestic and sexual violence in all of its forms, but also ensuring that anyone who is a victim of this most heinous crime of abuse is empowered, that they are empowered to come forward, that they are supported to come forward to seek help, that they know that they will be listened to, that they have confidence in the system, but also the people who work within the system. I hope that this is evident from our programme for government commitments. I hope it is evident in the considerations taken into account as priorities in the context of managing the pandemic, and I hope it is evident in the work being undertaken as a priority within my department and in conjunction with other departments, agencies and stakeholders. Since becoming Minister for Justice, I have myself sought to engage in as much as possible with those who are working across the sector and with victims. Unfortunately, I would say due to COVID restrictions, this has not been as easy as I would have liked. I like to be able to travel to different counties to meet, to engage with people, to see and to work with them in their own workplace where they do such fantastic work. So I want to assure all of those who do this fantastic work with victims, those who have advocated for change and reform in this area as the restrictions are lifted. I am determined to meet with you in person, if I haven't done so already, to meet with you in your workplace and of course where you do so much good work. I think as things have become clear, however, in the engagements that I have had to date, there have been a number of things highlighted to me, and one of them just again this week when I met with the Victims Helpline. One of those is that public information campaigns do make a difference. They're not everything, but they do make a difference. Requests for help from victims and those in vulnerable situations increase when information campaigns are underway, when there are advertisements on television, radio, social media and elsewhere. We've said on a number of occasions throughout the pandemic that even as we ask people to stay at home because of the restrictions, we know that home is not necessarily a safe place. It's not a safe haven in the same way as it is for so many of us. The Still Here campaign, which was launched, is about getting the message out there that services continue to be available to victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence, and that COVID travel restrictions do not apply, and I have to stress this, they do not apply to persons who are in domestic abuse situations or who are seeking help. Further information on the organisations involved in this campaign are on the website www.stillhere.ie. We are also midway through the No Excuses campaign, the Department of Justice National Awareness campaign to tackle domestic and sexual violence. This is a campaign from a key action on the second National Strategy on Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence, which is from 2016 to 2021, and we're obviously moving to produce a third strategy. Its aims are firstly to increase the awareness of domestic and sexual violence, to bring about a change in long-established societal behaviours and attitudes, and to activate bystanders with the aim of decreasing and preventing this violence, talking to friends, talking to families, talking to members of the community who may recognise changes. Domestic violence, unfortunately, and I think we'll all agree with this, has increased significantly during the pandemic. It is frightening to see the prevalence, but the type of violence as well, and the increase in the type of violence mainly towards women. In 2020, in response to the impact of this pandemic, the impact on frontline services funded by my department, an additional 327,590 in COVID-specific funding has been made available. This has been This has been used to help organisations to adapt and to continue their services in this period, and obviously much larger and more significant funding for the day-to-day running of these organisations is provided by TUSLA. The Minister for Children has been able to increase that funding as well, but I know he will speak to that himself later. The funding for my own department has been used, as I've said, to help organisations adapt and to continue their services. Under Budget 2021, I've also secured an additional 400,000 to continue this very specific COVID funding, which will again help organisations to support victims of crime, including victims of domestic abuse. While this has undoubtedly, Lasken Corley, been an awful time for so many, I think it has helped us to bring about some permanent changes, which maybe would have taken a little bit longer. One of the first pieces of legislation that I brought forward as Minister for Justice enabled the courts to make greater use of live video links and remote hearings. And we had a very welcome development only recently in the last month or so, where for the first time ever a domestic violence protection order was secured in the District Court by a woman via video link from her own kitchen. This really is a very welcome development for so many people. I know too that tackling domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is also a priority for the Garda Commissioner, and I have spoken to him several times since my own appointment on this about how we can continue the department with the Gardaí, but how we can look at newer ways to try and tackle this issue. And Garda Síochána, I think, have already shown their commitment by completing the national rollout of the Divisional Protective Service Units by the end of September. The Divisional Protective Service Units will support the delivery of a consistent and a professional approach to the investigation of sexual and domestic crime. In addition to that, all serving members from Garda Síochána who engage in frontline policing will receive specialist training for engaging with victims of sexual crime and vulnerable witnesses. Both of these are recommendations that were made and included in Supporting a Victim's Journey, which is a plan to help victims and vulnerable witnesses in sexual violence cases, a plan which I launched recently and which followed on as a comprehensive roadmap for implementing the O'Malley recommendations. There are, of course, a huge number of recommendations, 57 in total, over 4 overarching themes, all of which I'm fully committed to implementing and working with the agencies, NGOs and in particular victims of these crimes. It outlines the report it specifically measures and supports to protect and help vulnerable witnesses during the investigation and the prosecution of sexual offences, giving full effect to the actions contained in the Supporting a Victim's Journey. I am committed to ensuring that victims are supported, that they are informed, that they are respected, that they are treated with the utmost compassion and professionalism by all of those who work within the justice system, and that everybody who they engage with is trained at the highest level. I think it's also important that not just victims feel as though they can come forward, but those who are perpetrators of these crimes know that through our support of the victims that they will be reported, that they will be charged and that they will face the correct consequences. And combating domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is not just about the Department of Justice. It requires a variety of supports and services being available. It requires, yes, a proactive and an appropriate approach by our agencies such as the Gardaí, the courts and the Legal Aid Board, but it also requires appropriately funded community services, and of course it requires robust underpinning legislation to ensure that perpetrators, as I've said earlier, are held accountable for their actions. It's because of the need for a truly joined-up action or approach that this Government is committed to conducting an audit of how the services for victims of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence are segmented across the different government agencies. I've just published a request for tender for a suitably qualified independent expert to undertake this audit, who will, as part of their work, be required to take account of the views of those working on the front line. The result of this independent audit will provide us with an independent, comprehensive analysis to inform how we develop proposals for the most effective future infrastructure. This is in line with our programme for government commitment. It will be completed by the end of March 2021. Domestic abuse, of course, it's important to say, is not just about violence. Coercive and controlling behaviour, whilst is more difficult to identify, can have a similarly devastating effect on victims. The landmark Domestic Violence Act of 2018, which came into force on the 1st of January 2019, created the offence of coercive control to recognise in law the devastating impact that emotional abuse can have on those upon whom it is inflicted. And it's everything from controlling what somebody can spend, to who they can engage with, to what is on their phone, and monitoring everything that they do. And the psychological impact that this can have on people is absolutely devastating. And that's why, again, last week it was really wonderful to see, or if I could use those words, it was very welcome to see the first conviction before a jury of the state for offence of coercive control. I think it takes immense courage for somebody to come forward and follow through on such a prosecution, and the bravery of the victim in this case is to be commended. I hope that as more convictions follow, other victims of coercive control will feel confident to come forward, and I have no doubt that my colleague will follow. Deputy Jennifer Carroll McNeill will touch on this further. We've also seen in recent days the abuse and the exploitation, mainly of women, where indecent images have been spread on the internet, and I look forward to working with all deputies in this House as we implement the harassment and harmful communications legislation before the end of the year. I know we all share a deep concern for victims of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, and a desire to provide the most effective system to support them. And I want to thank deputies who are here today to discuss these range of actions across the justice sector, and I really welcome the opportunity to listen to their views or any suggestions or proposals in this area that they have. Finally, if I could, I know I've gone way over time, just before I pass to my colleague, I want to express and to specifically address all victims of domestic violence. I urge them to reach out, to do so when it is safe to do so. I also urge anyone who is concerned that these offences are being committed to a friend, a family member, community, to please report this to the authorities. To conclude my opening remarks, I can tell or I can assure you that I'm fully committed to combating domestic violence in all forms. I will work with all my colleagues, with our dedicated community and voluntary organisations, to ensure that we do so in a way that serves the needs of victims. Thank you very much, Minister.